This man was hunting women in the middle of Alaska like they were animals. I just got back from a trip to Alaska not that long ago, and while I was there, my sister-in-law was asking if I had ever heard of the serial killer Bob Hansen, and I said yes. I grew up in Alaska. I grew up hearing about him, so I wanted to tell you guys the story. So Robert Hansen, you'll also hear him called Bob the Baker or Bob the Butcher Baker. He was a baker in Anchorage, Alaska in the 1970s and 80s. And this guy's really, really, really gross. This man was getting away with kidnapping women, releasing them into the wilderness, and hunting them down in the middle of Alaska, and no one had any idea. I'm going to be talking about some graphic stuff, so just keep that in mind in this video. Robert grew up in Iowa, he moved up to Alaska, and he had been kidnapping, mutilating women for a long time, and he was specifically targeting strippers, topless dancers, topless barmaids, anyone who he felt like was going to be easier for him to find. People weren't going to go to the police, because we see time and time again that sex are just not treated fairly by the police. They aren't really taken seriously, so they're easy victims for offenders. So he would target women who he felt like no one would miss. And some of his victims even today have not been identified. But we don't know exactly how long Robert was kidnapping for. We know that he started off with lighter things like just kidnapping and more. So at one point he even kidnapped a woman, took her to his house, chained her by her neck, and then started to abuse her and assault her. And then when he got tired, he took a nap upstairs. This poor young girl, I believe this victim was 17. She was absolutely terrified, and her abuser is just upstairs napping. After he gets done with his little nap, it takes her to his car and then takes her to the airport. The airport in Alaska, this specific one, was for float planes and small, like personal planes, which is very common in Alaska. This was just kind of like a tarmac outside. It wasn't like they had to go through security. It wasn't like he really had to see other people. He could just go to his personal plane, load it up, and go. He puts her in the plane. She's still bound and handcuffed and everything. He's loading up the plane, and he says he's going to take her to a cabin in the middle of the woods. And she knows in this moment she's going to die. He miraculously somehow like breaks out and escapes, and she's still handcuffed, and she runs away from the plane, and she runs to the highway because the airport wasn't that far from the road, runs to the highway and flags down a trucker. At this point, she was bound, bruised, beaten, assaulted, she's bloody, and this trucker is like shocked at the sight of her, so he stops and picks her up. Because she's someone who she feels like the police might not take her seriously, she doesn't want to go to the police. She wants to go see her boyfriend. She's scared. She wants to go see the person she trusts the most. She says he'll be at one hotel. So she begs and pleads the trucker to drop her off at this hotel. And the trucker does. But what's crazy to me is this freaking guy, instead of like dropping her off at the hotel, staying with her, checking on her, he just gets back in his truck and goes to work. What job is so important that you can't help this girl who clearly has just been through the struggle of her life? You just leave her handcuffed? At least he has somewhat of a conscience. He calls the police and says like, hey, I just dropped this girl at this hotel. I don't think she's doing well. And the police come to the hotel. And when they get there, she's still handcuffed. And she is just sitting on a bed like waiting for help. So she tells the police who it is and what happened to her. She tells them about the plane. They go investigate, and immediately they know that it's Robert Hansen. But something about him is that he is like the smaller, skinny, thin little white guy, and he's got a bakery. He's known in the community. His wife is super religious, very involved in church. She is a teacher. So she is someone who's like really incredible and pivotal. And even though he's a little bit more quiet and reserved, because he's with someone like this, people just think he's like a harmless guy, and he's just this tiny little guy. Like, people don't take him seriously. Robert's story about this whole thing is that she was just exploiting him for money because he didn't want to pay for like whatever acts she had given him. So he says, oh, she's just being a crazy worker, don't take her seriously. And of course the police don't. Typical. So she has escaped, she is safe, but obviously like very traumatized. And her name, by the way, was Cindy Paulson, and this Cindy Paulson woman is like incredible. I don't know how you go through what she went through and then just like keep living life. Around the same time, like, people and police are finding other bodies of like dumped women, and they're starting to see a pattern of like females that are young, somewhere between like 17 and typically 25, but he does branch out to a little bit older at times. But they're finding a lot of bodies dumped along areas in Alaska, and that's not normal. People will sometimes go missing in Alaska, but you don't normally just find a dumped body. But no one's really thinking a serial killer. That's kind of like no one's going to that. One body was found by a construction worker near Uklitna Road, and it was a Jane Doe. It's actually still, she's never been identified to this day, so they refer to her as Uklitna Annie. Same year, a body that was later identified as Joanna Messina was discovered in a gravel pit, and this was near Seward. A few years later, in 1982, they found a body of a 23-year-old named Sherry Moros, and her remains are found near the Nick River. Now, something to keep in mind about Alaska, it is so rural up there. Like, Alaska is not like normal places where you can drive 10 minutes to another county or another city. It is like an 8-hour drive in between some towns or villages, and there's only 2 cities in the whole state. So no one has really put together that like all these bodies might be connected at this point because they're so spread out. But one badass woman, one of the only females in the police force at this time, her name is Maxine Farrell. She is amazing, and she actually was on the site when they found Uklitna Annie, and she is convinced there's a serial killer. Of course, no one takes her seriously because she's a woman and no one thinks that she can think for herself. But she is incredible, and I'm gonna have to do a part 2 for this video. I'll post it right after this one.